Let's look at writing a plan for our two independent groups experiment. So these are the things that I need to include in my plan. I need a description of who my participants are, and I need to know how many I'm intending to sample. And remember, that's your intent. It doesn't have to be the exact number you actually get, but it's in what you would want to do in your plan. I need to describe my treatment group and my control group. Now, often when we talk about the control group, remember that's talking about the standard of care or the normal situation, whereas the treatment group is doing something different. I need to describe my response variable. So what is it that I'm measuring? Am I measuring the time it takes to do something, the rating I give a food? What is it that I'm measuring? I need to then have some detailed instructions, and particularly that must include how am I randomly allocating treatments to participants. So how am I going to decide which student is either in the treatment group or the control group? I then need to add an explanation of how I'm going to collect the data and how I'm going to record that result. And lastly, I need to look for any sources of variation. So remember, in an experiment, we want to have everything controlled so that the only difference between my treatment group and my control group, the only difference is going to be due to the experiment itself, but I want to control all of the other factors. So when I come to record data for this type of experiment, I need one column which has which group that we're in. So if I was doing my dominant hand, non-dominant hand, I would have the students, they would write either dominant or they would write non-dominant in that column. Okay, and then my response would be the time. So this would be, I might write 45 seconds and 28 seconds. And so I've got my response variable in that second column there. So let's look at an example. So I need my step-by-step set of instructions. So I'm going to find the sample size of the students present. So it might be that I turn up on the day and I find I've got 24 students in a class. I'm going to divide that in half, and so that tells me I'm going to have 12 students that will do the experiment with their dominant hand, and how many are going to do it with their non-dominant. Okay, now I just looked at this. This instruction here I need to fix up. Okay, so I'm going to have some pieces of paper with the word dominant or non-dominant written on it. So I'm going to have pieces of paper with the word dominant, and I'm going to have other pieces of paper with the word non-dominant. So if I've got 24 people in the class, I'm going to have 12 pieces of paper with the word dominant and 12 pieces of paper with the word non-dominant on it. Then I'm going to put them in a container, shuffle them around, mix them up so they are random, and then each student is going to randomly be given or choose a piece of paper, and that tells them which hand they're going to write with. Then on my whiteboard, I'm going to use a data projector, and I'm going to put a stopwatch onto that to the screen so that everyone in the class can see that. I'm going to ask students to get a pen and make sure and move so that they can see the whiteboard. So this is again controlling the conditions. I want to make sure everyone can see it. Okay. Then I'm going to give them their instructions. So what that means is that when I'm ready and the students are ready, I'm going to put a paragraph up on the whiteboard. I'm going to start the stopwatch, and students will then need to write down that paragraph onto a piece of paper. As soon as they've finished that, they're going to look at the stopwatch on the board, and they're going to look at the time that it is, and they're going to record that time on their paper. So then I'm going to collect all those pieces of paper and record that onto a Google Sheet, and I've given a little example of what that would look like. And lastly, I'm going to say thank you to the kids for doing my experiment. So that's my detailed set of instructions that I would give. some of the things that I want to control the variation for. Because remember, we want to keep everything the same except for the one thing that we're testing. So, for example, if I was to give the instructions very clearly at the start, then all of the students should, if the instructions are clear, when I press start on the stopwatch, they should all start at exactly the same moment in time. So if I don't give clear instructions, it might be that some students are busy talking to each other, don't know what they're doing, and when I press start on the stopwatch, they won't all start at the same time. So I want to try and control that, so that's what I will do, is I'm going to give the instructions very clearly so that everyone starts at the same time. Another thing that I might control is looking at the distance from the whiteboard. I want to make sure that everyone can read the passage on the screen, and I also want to make sure that they can all see the stopwatch clearly. So I want to make sure before I get started, I want to make sure that all the students can have looked and checked that they can see the screen clearly. And if they can't, that they move up closer before we begin. Another thing that I might control is to make them all use the same type of thing. So I might want them all using pens or all using pencils, because it might be that there is a difference, that I could write faster or slower with one versus another. So I want to try and control it and be much more consistent, and so I'm going to make them all use the same type of writing utensil.